Welcome back, everybody, to DissedMedia, a startup story, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of starting a business from the ground up. And today, we're going to be talking to a gentleman who's got a lot of experience in the leadership space, in the consulting space, and really helping people thrive. Our guest today is a business leader, an expert, a keynote speaker, a best-selling author who helps turn managers into high-performing leaders with over 20 years of experience leading organizations and running multi-million-dollar businesses. With us today, we have Mr. Andy Neillie. Andy, how are you?
Well, I'm doing well, although you made me sound a lot smarter than I'm in that intro, as your listeners will discover as we get into our discussion in the next few minutes.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I want to make sure I cut this out of the intro. I'm going to bring everybody up to speed as to what's been happening in my world the last 30 minutes. But this is Dr. Andy Neillie. So we want to make sure that we throw that in there because you worked for it, you earned it. We got to make sure we say it.
Well, and really, my wife earned it, Ben, or at least she helped me earn it. Ben, there's a designation ABD for people that finish their classroom studies for their doctorate, and then they are all but dissertation. You have 10 years to finish your dissertation, and I took 9. So my wife and my doctoral reader, the man assigned to help me, kind of threw me across the finish line right before the time expired. So I'm pleased with the research I did. I really went deeply into the personal side of leadership effectiveness, and I wouldn't have my doctor in front of my name if it wasn't for a patient wife and a relentless reader.
You know, I'm glad you said that. One of the things you get to do when you do your dissertation is you get to write an acknowledgement. And absolutely, number one, I have to thank my wife, my kids for their patience. While I was often locked away and not engaged and, studying and sometimes short-tempered, all the things.
My wife kicked me to a coffee shop Tuesday and Thursday night for many weeks to get that thing done. Thank you, honey.
Yeah. And by the way, it was funny, before we got started, we were talking about our animal. Well, you were telling me about your dogs. I have a dog as well. I even acknowledged my dog.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, and my doctoral studies are around leadership, and you alluded to, one of the books I've written has become a little bestseller called The Golden Principles, Life and Leadership Lessons from a Rescued Dog. You may see our dogs pop up on the daybed. I'm working out of my home office today. My wife's got our daybed. I think I learned just as much about leading well from these rescued dogs that we got from tough situations as I did in all of my 25,000 pages of reading and interviewing and research and all of that. So there's a lot we can learn from our dogs and our cats, the pets in our homes.
Yeah, absolutely. They certainly bring a lot of, give us a lot of patience. Nobody is more enthusiastic about you being home than your dog.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Makes you feel like $1 million. And learning to get down to their level and realizing a proactive yes is always better than a reactive no. Getting to live in the moment, realizing yesterday is behind you and tomorrow's in front of you. I mean, these are just good life and leadership lessons that my dogs have taught me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to dig in to everything. I mean, when I say that, it's because one of the reasons I'm excited for this conversation is, you did your work around leadership in your academic studies. I did mine around positive psychology and applications of positive psychology in the workplace. So whenever I get somebody who's kind of nerded out on this stuff, I love it because we get to get into some fun topics.
Yeah.
I want to get people up to speed with your background and what you've done and really what brings you to what you're doing today. So if you wouldn't mind just giving a little bit of of your past, your backstory.
You bet. Well, and it's an interesting backstory, just like everyone's interesting backstory. This one's very personal to me. It really began as a youth. I became a Christian at a very young age. I don't come from a church-going family at all, but I had a friend that invited me to a church camp, and I became a follower of Christ. as a very young child, and I'm growing up reading gospel stories about this wonderful servant leader. And then Ben, I think like the first real job I had was on a construction site while I'm going to college. And I had a boss who had an anger management issue. And man, if you were within like 6 feet of him and he had a power tool in his hand, when he lost it, you better dodge. And so I'm reading about what good leadership would look like. And then I'm going to work for a boss that is kind of the antithesis of that. And I'm just realizing this is not right. It shouldn't be this way. And we all have our bad stories. That was kind of my origin story of no bad bosses. I worked for a man at one point that he didn't have an anger management issue, but he took credit no matter what his team did. He made sure he was the one that looked good in front of the client. He was the one that looked good in front of senior leadership. And so this stuff is bubbling up inside me when I'm thinking, man, this isn't what a good leader is supposed to do. They're at the bottom of the pyramid. They're not at the top of the pyramid. They're making their people look good. They're equipping their people so they can excel. And so that really is, in some respects, what awakened. And then along the way, I just had a bunch of people tell me, Andy, you're a good speaker, you're a good writer. When you communicate, people get it. And so you kind of blended some of maybe my natural bent toward communication with what I was passionate about. Nobody should work for a bad boss. And that led to, as you alluded to, I've been having a chance to talk to corporations and trade associations and privately held companies for more than 20 years now about how do we make sure we don't just have managers, but we're helping people move toward becoming high achieving leaders. And along the way, I got my doctorate and learned a lot. I like to say, Ben, I'm not sure I was ever a good leader. I'd like to think I'm a student of good leaders. I want to learn what are the best practitioners doing to not be like those guys and to be more like this guy. And that's kind of my origin story. Along the way, my wife and I started some retail businesses that we grew for 15 years. We sold them last year. I'm off doing other things. So I speak, I train, I write, and I love the startup entrepreneurial ethos that you bring to the table.
That's awesome. It's funny that you talk about working for a bad boss, and that kind of lit your fuse. I think that happens for a lot of people. I know for me, it's interesting when you go down this path of deciding to go, get a doctoral degree, something like that, especially if you're working in business, there's no extra pay. There's no pay raise. You're really just doing it out of the pure pursuit of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Trying to get better at something. As our mantra is, helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what you do. And it's really a practice in trying to get better. And I will say, for me, what lit my fuse was I had a burning question, which was, how do you make people happy? Because I was working for an organization. I'm just the kind of person that, I'm going to do the things I'm interested in, and then I'm going to commit to it. And then I try to pull my kind of joy and excitement and stuff out of that.
Yep, love it.
But the thing is that not everybody's that way. Like people come to work from a lot of different places with a lot of different attitudes and approaches. And my burning question was, how do you make people happy? And when I went around, asked the leadership, asked different people, heard a lot of different responses. Some were like, it's not your problem, don't worry about it. If they're a problem, you can manage them out. I get where people were coming from, but it wasn't really satisfying, a satisfying answer. So this going in this pursuit, led me to 5 years of focusing on higher studies and deeper learning. And guess what? I still don't have an answer.
But it is interesting because, you're talking about what other people would call, well, these are the soft skills, leadership, happiness and satisfaction. There is a concrete reality. When people are happy at work, they stay, employee retention climbs, And I think we all know those statistics. Depending upon the space you're in, replacing an employee is anywhere from $25,000 to $200,000 of expense to replace that position. So when somebody's happy at work, they stay. The other thing is customer retention grows when employees stay. So people may say, oh, Ben's not really a serious business guy. He's just this happiness guy. There is a concrete, practical output when you can create environments where people are satisfied, happy, where they feel like their work matters when they come to work, where they've got a community of people that they consider these are my people when they come to work. You end up building a more profitable business because your people come and stay and the customers come and experience that.
Yeah, I think that obviously very important. And
Yeah.
even when you do bring new people in, I mean, it takes 6 months to a year
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to get them to where the previous person who departed that position is even at. So,
Neutral
like, just
perspective.
getting people to that
Right.
performance level,
Yeah.
it's not an immediate thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. In 2008, my leadership consulting and training and speaking just dropped off the radar 18 years ago because I was an outside consultant. I got one phone call from a big technology company and I lost $85,000 in that one phone call, and those phone calls kept coming. And in some respects, Ben, it was a time of real hardship for so many of us, the 2008 financial crisis. My
Yeah.
wife and I launched some retail Central Texas-based businesses at that time. And retail is a different world. I was a business consultant. I was working on big ticket items, long term, small audiences, and all of a sudden I've got low ticket item, high volume, high turnover. And part of what my wife and I tried to do is we grew this business that, as you alluded to, we ultimately sold for a multiple of EBITDA and a multi-million dollar business, was figure out what do we need to do to keep our people? Because if a retail employee comes and stays, you don't have to repeat that 6 months that you alluded to over and over and over and over and over. And Ben, in the retail world, I didn't have any experience in that. It is unusual for somebody to come and stay 6 months, then a year, then 3 years, then 5 years, then 10 years, then 15 years. But when you can create an environment where people choose to stay, you don't have that cycle that you alluded to.
Yeah, I think, you know, people work for a lot of different reasons. But I think when you give people autonomy, when you give
Yeah.
them accountability, responsibility,
Yeah.
you reward and recognize them for their efforts, their contributions.
Yeah.
And something I read years ago, Marcus Buckingham wrote this book about I'm trying to remember. I don't think it was Now Discover Your Strengths, but it might have been. I know it was one of the first books he wrote. I've read a couple of them, is why I'm
Good author.
struggling with
Good.
the title.
Yeah.
But in his first book, one of the things he talked about was paying people for what they're worth, not for market rate and what HR says. Because when you have a good employee and maybe somebody who's doing customer service, let's say, because
Yeah.
that's one of those jobs, it's high turnover,
Yeah.
lower pay. But when you have a really good person doing that work, thinking about going beyond that market rate
Yeah.
compensation and saying,
Yeah.
what is the value of this person?
Good way to
If they
put
were
it.
to leave, what would it cost me to
Yeah.
replace them? How many
Yeah.
customers would I lose because they're no longer here?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
really basing your compensation on things like that.
Well, and the interesting thing is that feeds the person who's being recognized for doing a good job. That also has a business side to it because, hey, this person is helping us grow our NPS scores. And so we're getting more customer referrals. And there's this, virtuous cycle, I think, that they talk about. So recognizing that. Now, if you and I are being really honest, oftentimes in today's economy, the tension around how to do that never goes away. I remember one of my graduate school professors talking about the difference between static equilibrium and dynamic equilibrium. Static equilibrium, you got a bowl, you got a marble, it rolls around and then just kind of stays down there. Today's leadership in the marketplace, it's dynamic equilibrium. You've got the same bowl, you have the same marble, but you and I, as the managers and the leaders, we can't ever relax. Gosh, how do I pay the value for that, and how do I deliver profitability for my portion of the company, or how do I deliver value and give this person permission, and how do I still meet my overall team's KPIs? I think that's the challenge of leadership is the balance of treating your people like they're gold and expecting your people to produce the gold. I just coined that, but I think that works, and that's the tension, right? We can't just make everything easy for them. We've got to hold them responsible to perform, and manage that dynamic tension, that dynamic equilibrium.
So, something I want to take a step back, and just for those who might not be familiar, you mentioned NPS, Net Promoter Score, for those who may not have heard of NPS before, but I love NPS because it is one of those things that, back years ago, I'm talking like a couple decades ago when I first started my career, did customer service work, telephone customer service work. And we got into doing surveys where we had to ask people their satisfaction. And when it comes to things like customer satisfaction, you would say something like, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, what's your level of satisfaction?
We've all seen those, yeah.
Yeah. And the thing I love about NPS is that when you ask a general how satisfied are you kind of question, that what's the difference between a 4.5 and a 4.8?
Yeah.
And can you quantify it? Like, is there a dollar difference between those things? NPS is one of those tools that really helps you quantify it. And there is a dollar, you can, the better the score, there's a correlated improvement in revenue.
Yeah. I just watched a video earlier this week about a company up in the Pacific Northwest who is a consulting company that decided to do some of the things you're talking about, in many respects, kind of turn over controls to their people and let them figure out, in the midst of their annual billable hours, how much vacation time are they going to take, and working from home versus working remote, and the clients they're going to serve. And Ben, you and I are familiar with NPS scores. A score of 50 is a very high NPS score. I think the Chick-fil-A's of the world are like in the 40s and 50s. This consulting firm has an NPS score, so customer score, of 78, just off the chart.
Goodness.
Because in some respects, they're letting the people be happy. Hey, make sure you're happy in the work. And once again, they've got billable hours. They've got, they have responsibilities. But part of the happiness equation, part of my leadership equation is give people the tools they need. They want to do a good job. You just need to give them what they need to be successful. That's part of what the mark of a good leader is, can my team execute because of what I'm doing for them?
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, because you talk a lot about management and leadership, and in classes I teach, this is something I like to do with my students is I'll say, how many of you think you are a good manager? And, I'll get a smattering of hands that kind of go up,
Yeah.
and then I'll say, how many of you think you're a good leader? And it always gets more hands than management. I think because there's this, I don't know, subconscious kind of, I would say there's a quantifiable nature to management. Management is about measures and making sure that the daily, weekly, monthly gets done. Leadership, a little bit more abstract. And the thing I often say is, you don't get to decide if you're a good leader. The people around you decide whether you're a good leader.
Such a good insight. So,
it's really one of these things. You can't really self-elect, being a good leader. It is a representation of the number of people who are enthusiastic about your presence, right?
It's like me saying, you know what? I'm really proud to be humble, Ben. You can't do that. So good insight.
when like, I'm a good person, I'm a good team player. Well, that's by your assessment, I'm sure you are. but
Yeah.
you unfortunately you don't get to pick.
No.
So I
No.
wonder, in your talks about management and leadership,
Yeah.
how do you approach that? How do you define and distinguish those two things, and
Sure. Well,
get
first of
that
all, I
into
really
people's heads?
appreciate the way you laid that out. And, there is no simple definitions, and leadership and management are not in opposition to each other. But if there was a simple definition, management is about things and leadership is about people. And you can measure things. Hey, you had some goals for the quarter that your employer gave you. Did you and your team get that software written? Did you get that product to market? Did you get those units delivered? Did you get those sales closed? Did you get that project in the ground? So management is easier to measure. Leadership is harder, and I want to make sure. I've been looking at leaders for more than 20 years now. I don't know if anybody ever arrives, and in some respects, I realize I'm still an ugly, messy work in progress. I think there are four things that, as I take a look at managers who are kind of making strides toward being high achieving leaders. First is they see the big picture. They don't have their eyes down all the time. They look in from the outside. They're people of conviction, strategy, bigger picture. Second thing is this whole thing of, am I thinking about how can my team execute against our goals, and am I doing what I need to do to help them be competent? Conviction and competence are two markers for managers that are becoming high achieving leaders. The third one, this is where you and I could talk for many hours, I think, around that whole character piece. You'll never be a better leader than you are a person. Fair minded, other oriented, selfless. Leaders eat last rather than leaders eat first. You weigh the balance of how do I help my people succeed. That third element of character, conviction, competence, character. And then the fourth element, in some respects, pulls them all together. If somebody is becoming a high achieving leader, they're wrestling with this dynamic equilibrium of how do I put my people first while I put my product first. And the classic example of that is I had somebody come to me there. They had a team member whose parents were aging, and one of them needed to go in a memory care unit, and it required this manager to give the team members some time off to go to Chicago or Detroit or someplace where the parents lived and help with that move. Already had burned through all their PTO, already had used all their vacation, didn't have room to be gone for a week or 10 days, but it was the right thing to do to help that person be the kind of child they needed to be to their aging adults. And this manager figured out how to make it happen. I recognize the best managers I work with, they wrestle with that tension. I call it the leadership covenant. It's not just a contract, and your goal is not just to only make your employees happy. It's to find that balance. It's like here in the state of Texas where I live, I'm going to a wedding in 2 weeks, and the young couple that my wife and I've gotten to know, love and affection and romance and the honeymoon until death do us part and all of this personal stuff. What they didn't realize until they went to get their formal marriage approved, there's a legal document that's signed by the officiant and recorded with the county clerk or the secretary of state. Covenant is both a personal and a relational, or personal and a formal structure. And when I'm working with managers who are trying to become high achieving leaders, I see them wrestling with that. How do I balance the KPIs that my team is responsible for with a team member that needs to go to Chicago for 2 weeks and help an aging parent? Leaders wrestle with that kind of stuff. Managers, you know what? The job's got to be done. Suck it up, buttercup.
Something I mention often. I teach a lot of courses in business, and the one thing that I always start out with, it's very true. It's unfortunate but true. Businesses exist primarily. Now I'm talking about businesses, not talking about the people within them.
Yeah.
Corporations, businesses are their own entity. They exist primarily for the purpose of revenue and profitability.
Yeah.
Because without it, there's no sustainability. Without it, there's no jobs. And everything that you get as an employee within an organization are due to the benefits of profitability.
Yeah.
As a manager and a leader who's been charged with that task of increasing revenue, increasing profitability, you know, and this is something I've kind of gotten into in my own writings, my own study, is that individuals are driven by, you know, we learned Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Maslow's
right?
hierarchy. I knew you were going to mention that. Yep.
Right?
They all default
Top
to
of
it, right?
top of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization, right? We're always in this pursuit of improving our internal intrinsic well-being.
Yeah.
However, businesses don't have intrinsic well-being. They only have revenue and profitability. It is all extrinsic well-being. And so as a manager and a leader, we've got to figure out how we balance the needs of the people, which are diametrically opposed to the needs of the business, right? Because
Yeah, but
people can get by with less money and a strong family, but businesses won't.
can't. But I appreciate also what you said as you led into this. Having a business that is sustainable means, employee, you still have a job next quarter or next year. So it's the businesses are not heartless because they're all about profit. Now, can there be excess? You know, the 1980s Gordon Gekko movie or whatever that was, Wall Street, where it's all about the bling.
We could just talk about the
Obviously.
2026 Jeff Bezos.
Oh,
We don't even need to go back to the 1980s.
Good point. Good point. But the whole point is, if you don't let my company be profitable, I can't employ you next year. That's the tension that leaders need to wrestle with. I have to have hard conversations with employees, even though I don't want to and they don't want to. If I'm a good leader, I learn how to have a hard conversation without it being a harsh conversation. But the reason I have to have a hard conversation is because I want that employee and my other employees to have a job next quarter or next year. And if we don't address this lack of performance or this behavior or this missing the mark or whatever it is, you know, part of my problem, Ben, is I have confused over the years nice with kind. And I thought my job was to be the nice boss. And I let people get away with stuff. And it impacted the whole team.
You know, I want to ask you, though, about difficult conversations, because one of the things that I see this, it's increased more and more. I've been in the consumer goods space for over 30 years, started my career rather early. And so I've had the benefit of being exposed to a lot of changes. I mean, I tell my students sometimes, like when I first started working at Coca-Cola, like you could smoke at your desk. That like blows people's minds.
Now I got to stick my vape pen in and make sure nobody sees it in the bathroom.
Where we are today. Yeah, but back in the day, like, you know, things were just different. And, you know, we've gotten so much better. I'm not saying we're done or that there isn't more to do, but compared to, and by the way, if I go back to my father's generation, we're better. We're better than we used to be.
I think you're right.
But when it comes to difficult conversations, one of the things I've noticed over the last 15 years or so is this, I don't want to say it's a desire to avoid, but definitely an avoidance of difficult conversations. That people, there are people who want the title, who want the pay, but don't want some of the accountability and challenges that come along with being in management and being in leadership, because difficult conversations suck.
But it's an easy marker for me when I'm invited into a company and I'm doing some of my audit work so I can begin to address a program that I think is going to address some issues. One of my early markers, Ben, is right what you're talking about. The people that I'm interviewing that are the ones that are having the hard conversations, those are the emerging leaders. The ones that avoid the hard conversations, they're just managers. I think learning to have a hard conversation that is not a harsh conversation, that as much as possible retains the dignity of the person across the desk from you. Doing that well, I think that's a mark of emerging leadership because, and you probably, I can't remember if it was Forrester or Gardner, somebody put out a report late last year, Gen Zs and alphas who are emerging into the workspace, they'll quit before they have a hard conversation with their boss.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yes.
Oh, wow, 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 wow.
Or having that difficult conversation with the younger generation, the perception is that you're attacking them,
Yeah,
and I'm not quite sure how we move beyond that, except that we need to have more of these kinds of conversations more openly to let people know that, feedback is important. You're not going to love every bit of feedback that you get. We've got to learn to grow and internalize it. And by the way, there's feedback I get today
yeah,
that I've gotten for many years, for decades. and it's still the same feedback. So one of my Achilles heels here is that when I write, especially when I write emails, my emails tend to be long. And my roles have always been in sales and marketing support, and sales and marketing people don't like long emails.
be brief, be bright, be done. Isn't that what they say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just give me the highlights.
Yeah,
But here's my problem. I don't like going back and forth. So in my view, I'm going to give you all the information you need so that you don't have to come back to me and ask me 10, because I don't want to you ask me this and I tell you that, and the back and forth. So I think I'm being helpful, but who am I being helpful to, them or me?
Fire hose just got turned on. Yeah, yeah. Good point. So feedback, it's a trite saying, but it's a true saying. Feedback is a gift, but we're the ones that have to decide what to do with it. And some of it's valid, some of it's not valid. I was leading a workshop earlier this year with a colleague, and that colleague is a people person to the nth degree. And I like people, but Ben, truth of the matter is I'm kind of an introvert who speaks for a living. I will have a blast being on this podcast with you because you're an energetic, twinkle in the eye kind of guy. But when we turn the cameras off and we finish this up, I'll be happy to be quiet for a while. And we realized as this person and I worked together, this person was not in the front of the workshop. They were down working with the teams on these exercises we were having them do. And I was up at the front of the workshop making sure that the instructions were being followed. And she was good at what she did, and I was good at what I did. If I had tried to be her, it wouldn't have been as effective. If she had tried to be me, it wouldn't have been effective. What really worked was we appreciated each other's strengths. So you dotting every I and crossing every T, that's a strength that needs to be paid attention to. As you said, if somebody can't read an email that goes below the break, then somehow you gotta meet them where they're at. On the one hand, on the other hand, it is great for you to be able to say, "Hey, Andy, let's go back to what I wrote last week, because if we just go through this, you got everything you need." There's a strength in every apparent weakness, and part of what we have to do is balance that. I think recognize, man, I want to learn, I want to grow. I've been doing this. You got a couple of old guys on this podcast, Ben. I've been around as long as you have, doing this since we were smoking in the offices. We've grown, we've learned some stuff, and we still need to keep open to feedback, right? Can I get better at that? Can I use ChatGPT to turn my 5 paragraphs into 3 paragraphs? Maybe.
I will say I have adopted that to try and make things more concise at times, because I know, my team that I communicate with, I look sometimes at the words and I go, they're not going to want these words. let me make it more concise.
Good for you.
But at the same time though, and this is, I will say this is my leadership weakness. I think it's important that we come to. one of my other beliefs about being a leader, being an effective leader, is that until you know yourself, you're not going to be able to help others. Like you have to be really in tune with your own strengths and your own weaknesses, because otherwise, you may be hypocritical. You may be coming off as not
Yeah.
unbelievable to
Yeah.
your team, and not unbelievable in a good way,
Right.
truly unbelievable. But one of my weaknesses is I tend to get very I would say my I don't want to call it apathy, but I will say that I tend to get very pragmatic, very direct, and can very cynical at
Huh.
times. And
This is why I like you so much. You and I have a sarcastic edge that works well at times and doesn't work well at times.
oh, I've definitely run aground with doesn't work well at times.
Uh,
But
yeah.
and top that with a sense of humor that can be a little bit dark at times and not everybody gets. So,
Yep. Yep.
a great combination for disaster when it comes to leadership, if you're not aware of these things that
Yeah.
these paths that you can go down, right? Um, how do you help people? Because I think a really important part of leadership is being a good coach. How do you get, I don't want to say how do you get people, because I think it's a process of learning and,
Yeah.
and evolving and kind of growing into it. But how do you
Yeah.
start that path of
Yeah.
bringing people to this level of attention, of
Wow.
focusing on
Great question, Ben.
improving and,
You and I
and
need to write that books next. We'll both be able to retire if we could crack that code. In my mind, though, I think there's probably three things to help people a little bit. The first one is they just need to recognize that their strengths probably have corresponding weaknesses, right? And so your quick wit, Ben, and your humor that just can take tension out of the room, that can move forward because you're a fast twitch kind of guy. That's a great strength. And you need some self awareness around not everybody is ready to move with me. And so I think that level of self awareness is important. I think having some type of review process in place so that you're asking some other people you trust. One of my mandates, I sit on some boards, and the reason that I think board leadership is important is because every leader needs a leader, and they need to be able to have somebody that will ask them the hard questions when nobody else around will. And then the third thing for me, very practically, like you, I have some really good days, and then I have some days when, man, I don't really like myself. I call it what helped me with my good days. I call it the leader's hour, and it's not necessarily 60 minutes, but it's when I can take time at the start of the day and get myself ready for the day. For me, that includes some spiritual disciplines. For a lot of people, there's some physical exercise involved with that, maybe some journaling. There's some, man, looking at my calendar and my to-do list. And very practically, if I can get that leader's hour under my belt, it helps me be more aware of others and less aware of me as I go throughout the day. I posted something on LinkedIn, and I probably miswrote it in my enthusiasm, but I said, I always start my day with the leader's hour, and here's what I do, and it really helps. And somebody responded and said, man, I admire you for doing it every day. I wish I could. And I realized I got to go in and edit that, because on my best days, I do what you and I are talking about, and it helps me be the leader that I want to be. And there's a lot of days when I don't. And
yeah.
that's why I think all of us, if we're being honest, we're all in process. Nobody
I
ever
think
arrives at
that's
a
a
high
really
achieving
important
leader.
point, because sometimes we read a good book. I give you an example. David Allen, Getting Things Done.
GTD.
Love that book. Changed my life.
Yeah.
Improved how I manage my time.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
made me more efficient. And I preach the tenets of getting things done to students and to others. And I say, this is a great book and this and that. And I would not be truthful if I was telling you that I do
Yeah.
all the getting things done every single day. Like I don't. However, I know how to get back on the horse. And I think that's the
That's the key,
important
isn't it?
part is that all of these lessons, whether you listen to a Marcus Buckingham, a Stephen Covey, all
Well,
the
more recently, James Clear with his Atomic Habits, and
yes,
I get that pushed into my inbox every like Thursday morning, and I look for it because it's just those little nuggets that remind me, just like you, Ben, of I kind of fallen off the horse a little bit. Let's get back on. So
yeah, but
yeah, that
knowing how to get back on is the important step. And I think you got to fill your head with as many. I don't know. It's sometimes anecdotal, but other times very prescribed processes,
yeah,
routines. Like
I agree.
there's not a one size fits all. And sometimes for you as an individual, it's about it's like mixed martial arts. You take a little bit of discipline from all of these different practices and you incorporate it and you make
Yeah,
it your own. And that becomes your
yeah,
attack on the world, right?
yeah.
But to try and mirror 100% one philosophy and dive in 100% be dedicated to that, it's difficult to do. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
saying like, yeah, some days I'm on it, some days I'm
Some days
not.
I'm well, and even this,
But
my whole, I want to talk to emerging leaders about how to be better leaders, but I don't have anything new to say. You get past Jesus Christ and Marcus Aurelius, and in the West, there's been nothing new in 2,000 years, but there's a certain person out there who gets Dr. Andy's voice just a little bit more than they might get John Maxwell or Patrick Lencioni or Marcus Buckingham. And so there are some people that my four leadership necessities and the lessons I learned from our pets, somebody's going to resonate with that. Somebody else, they get it when they read James Clear or David Allen, or they get it when they go to a John Maxwell seminar. So I think all of us just have to not be so full of ourselves that we think we're God's gift to the universe. No, we just want to be good people to the people that are around us, right? That's
I would say that there are definitely more people who feel that way than not.
yeah,
We're going to come across people who don't. We're going to come across people whose definition of win and success is less about people and more about things.
yeah,
It's just, it happens. But to your point, if we go back to the ancient writings, we've seen that lesson. It's been
yeah,
talked about. There are ways that we can manage through it and learn from it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I do want to ask real quick though on your book because you kind of mentioned it.
yeah,
Your inspiration for it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that and how that came
Well,
about.
I think there are some other people that are like strategic in their career path and the impact. I was never strategic. Shortly after my wife and I got married, we bought our first home, and you have a house, you got room for a dog. And so we wanted to get a dog, and my in-laws knew a vet who somebody had turned in a dog that had been lost out in the desert. We were living in the Phoenix, Arizona area at that point, and this dog needed a home, and so Alex got adopted by us, and Alex was a big, happy golden retriever, high energy, and part of the problem with a big, happy, high energy dog when you're working long hours at work is he's tearing the house apart. So our vet said, your dog needs a dog. And so we got our rescued dog, another rescued dog, and Alex and Kaibab, a golden colored, beautiful, Kaibab is a sandstone in the Grand Canyon, and the prior owners had named this dog. And we just realized these dogs are just filling our lives with joy. We hadn't started our family yet, and we were those dog parents that were just kind of crazy about our dogs. And then we got our fifth or sixth rescue, Redford. And Ben, he came from a horrible, horrible, spent a year as a breeding sire at a puppy mill in Arkansas, 65 dogs, I think, were distributed all over the U.S. to foster groups and rescue groups. And Redford ended up in Houston. We were living in Austin, where we still live at that time. And we had lost a dog and needed that replacement, that second dog. We always like to have two dogs. And Redford entered our lives. And Redford was just the guy was wounded hearted. He was a golden retriever that we all kind of think of as a happy, lucky, go lucky dogs. Redford urinated the first time I looked at him, and he would hide from me for weeks, and everything I did was wrong with Redford. And part of what I had to learn was some of the silly little lessons that I alluded to 30 minutes ago. Get down to their level. I can't come in and say, Redford, I'm here. I got to do a doggy play bow. And Redford had all these bad habits, and I kept yelling at him, no, and had to learn to, you know what I got to do is I got to find the good yes before the harsh no comes out. And so I got to reward good behavior. A proactive yes is always better than a reactive no. And then just seeing the dog. One of our dogs, she had cancer in a leg, and the vet said we're probably going to need to lose that leg and turn that dog into what they call a tripod. And my wife and I are devastated. And the vet said, Hey, dogs live in the current reality. They're not going to think about what they've lost and what they can't do. They're just going to get up and go to the park and figure out how to chase the ball with three legs. And just realizing, man, you just deal with the current reality. And so I'm learning these things from my dogs, and then I'm talking to other people about these. And at one point, a publisher heard me give a speech called The Redford Principle. Trust takes time. And he said, you got any other dog stories? And I said, I think these guys taught me more than my doctorate did. And that's how the book came about. And it's like a chicken soup for the soul, simple little lessons from our rescued pets. But we're still learning lessons. We've got a cattle dog that we rescued a year and a half ago. We've always had Goldens or Labs. This guy needs a job. He's a cattle dog. He was bred to herd. And then he's a mix. He's a German Shepherd, some of his breed is. So he's a Heinz 57. He's smart, and he needs a job, and he's stubborn. Well, part of what I have to do if I'm going to lead him well is make sure that he's in environments that he's got a bit of control, because a herding dog wants to have a job. So very practically, Ben, my wife and I are big CrossFitters. We take our dogs to the gym, but we don't take Traveler to the gym, because there's nothing he can be in charge of there. And so he just barks and gets anxious, and it makes people upset. We bring the Goldens, and the Goldens just want to love on everybody. But Traveler, we have to put him in environments where he can feel like he's doing meaningful work. Well, there's another leadership lesson there. Give your people something to do that's productive. That's what's going to make them happy at the end of the day. So there's no rocket science in this book, but it's practical lessons about how do we lead? What are the things our pets can teach us?
That's awesome. I love that. I love that that you're bringing the leadership lessons through the lens of animals, right? I think they're for those listening who don't have an animal or have owned a pet, it really is the most rewarding thing, fun thing. Our dog Roxy, she is she has been our constant. She's a Dachshund Terrier mix, and
that's
she has all the attitude
in
of
a
both.
small body, yeah.
All the attitude of both, but she is like I said, even in my dissertation, provided an acknowledgement for Roxy.
Yeah,
that's something that animals do to us.
Yeah, there really is, and there's lessons we can learn from them if we slow down and try to figure out how do I meet them where they're at, right? And listeners, Ben and I both know what a play bow is. It's this silly little move where dogs kind of stretch their paws out in front of them and their tails up wagging, and it's saying, "I'm safe. I want to be your friend." And here I am, grown guy with a doctorate, coming in from a leadership engagement across the country, feeling all high and mighty about myself. I'm getting home at midnight and dropping my suitcase and my backpack, yelling, "I'm home!" and terrifying Redford. And so, I had to learn when you come home, Andy, walk in quietly and do a human version of a play bow, because that's what it took to meet him where he was at. And so, those of you that don't know dachshunds are the smallest dog with the biggest personality in the room. They they got attitude, so you just
They
have fun
do.
with them.
They do. Well, I think that too is a really important lesson that you touch upon there is, and I think leaders tend to do this, is that you meet people where they are. You
Yeah,
don't demand people come to where you are. You
no,
try to unlock the potential of people
good for you.
by, seeing where they're at
Yeah,
and trying to help them.
yeah,
Previously, I used to have a pretty big team that I manage. Now I'm pretty much an individual contributor, so I am a peer amongst teams as opposed to leading teams.
yeah, yeah,
And I will say that one of the things I do kind of miss sometimes,
yeah,
working with people, mentoring people,
yeah,
coaching people, helping them
yeah,
unlock new skills and helping them level up in their career. It's something I still do, as faculty, as a
yeah,
teacher. Other
yeah.
people have reached out, but
Well, and I love what
that
you said. I hope your listeners got what you said, because the good job of a good leader is to unlock the potential of their people. That's the key, right? And if you've hired the right people and you have the right organization, when you help them unlock their potential, it serves the good of the business, as you talked about. We got to be profitable. We got to be viable. We have to be in business next quarter, next year. But I think it's the key you said. How does a good leader unlock the potential of their team members? That's the tension, I think, that I don't know if we ever get it fully right, but those are the things we ought to be thinking about in order to produce the productivity the business needs.
one of the things I want to ask you as we kind of coast here towards the end, but something I like to ask
Yeah,
people is when you think about, as you've been in this coaching leadership space for some time,
right.
thinking about all of those moments, what is a moment that is either your proudest or most difficult challenge that you dealt with being a leader?
I did a keynote speech earlier this year for a construction company and rocked the house. I had people that realized, man, this language of leadership you're talking about, Andy, I now get it, and I'm going to do things. They wanted copies of my book signed. I said, man, if I sign your book, that makes it worth like at least a nickel on eBay. So it's more valuable. And so the deep satisfaction of using my communication skills to get inside their heads and hearts at some level and help them realize you'll never be a better leader than you are a person. Let's start with these 4 leadership necessities and build them into your life. Tremendously satisfying. If I could deliver that type of value, once a month for the rest of my life, I would die a happy man.
That is awesome. I appreciate that. Okay, this is my own point of view. So, but also a very important element of this is a step out of the spotlight.
Yeah.
I've worked with more than a few leaders. I could count on two hands the number of people I've worked with who are obsessed with being in the spotlight, obsessed with being the mouthpiece in every situation, and really kind of taking the spotlight from their team.
Yeah.
And something that I enjoy as somebody who works under leadership is that leader kind of sharing the space with other people. I think that's really one of those aspects that people tend to enjoy and tap into, and
Yeah.
that they don't have to be so being a good listener. The old adage, God gave us 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. We need to listen twice as much as we speak.
Yeah.
Another important element, I think.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yep. I agree. I was in a meeting the other day and I realized one of the people sitting at the table, all he's doing is asking good questions to get other people to think about the issue that was on the table. And I thought, man, this is kind of what you're talking about, right, Ben? He's not trying to be in charge and push his own agenda forward. He's pulling out what they needed to do. And I thought, man, that's
That's a good coach. That's somebody who, you know, getting the brain trust of the team involved in solving the problem. I think that's how we get it done.
Yep. Great.
So, Andy, how do people find you? How do they tap into your wisdom, your knowledge, get you booked for an event maybe that they're interested in having you come in and speak at?
Well, NeillieLeadership.com. So I've got a website, and the bad thing about my last name is it's spelled a little challenging. If you get it right, you get it right. Neillie, NeillieLeadership.com. And I've got a link on the top of my website if somebody just wants to grab 15 minutes and pick each other's brain about some of the leadership issues. Man, I'd be happy to jump on a phone call or a Zoom call. The other thing, Ben, is I have a 8-page ebook, The 3 Imperative Leadership Conversations, how to hold a hard conversation, some of what you and I've talked about in the last 45 minutes, how to hold a coaching conversation. You just mentioned what makes a good coach, and then how to hold a threefold affirmation conversation. Every leader should recognize part of their job is CEO, Chief Encouragement Officer. So I've got a little ebook with some content and some worksheets around those 3 imperative leadership conversations. That ebook is available at leadershipmaterials.com. It's just a free download, leadershipmaterials.com, and people can sign up for my blog there. And I blog every couple of weeks about the very stuff you and I have been talking about, video blogs or mainly written blogs where we could start a dialogue around some of this stuff. Man, it has been great being on your podcast. Thank you for the privilege of the time we've had together.
Oh, well, I appreciate the kind words. It has been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Andy. And I think that there's a lot of good nuggets of information. So hopefully people will reach out, check out your podcast, or check out your book. I'm sorry, check out this podcast. Check out your book. You know, and it's funny. I mentioned this at the top when we were getting into things, but as anybody who's been following the show, listening to the show, watching the show on YouTube, because we are on a mission to hit 100,000 subs by the end of 2026 on YouTube. As of the taping of this episode, we just crossed 21,000. So, we're almost a quarter of the way there, which is amazing. But I've been building out this new studio and, putting all the lights and the gear and the camera and everything. I even got a teleprompter now in front of me, so that helps with my introductions. Here's the problem, though. Folks, if you're going to put a studio together, make sure you charge your batteries, because my camera battery was dead. So I had to call an audible. My old setup was I did my taping through my iPhone. And so I'm running around the house, getting all these things. Things are flying everywhere. Again, very patient wife. And so I'm running frantically around. I'm 5 minutes late getting on this show today. But thank goodness Andy's such a patient and pleasant person that he did not bail on me because I hadn't shown up yet. So thank you for that.
Pretty agile to get things pulled back together in 5 minutes. It would have taken me 3 days probably.
Yeah, it was tough, but well, gang, hey, thank you all for checking out DissedMedia Startup Story. I really appreciate you guys and the enthusiasm, the support for the show. It's been amazing. Please keep it coming. Like I said, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your dad. Most importantly, tell your enemies. They're the ones who tend to take action on your words, and that just benefits us, which is great. As mentioned, we are trying to get to 100,000 subs by the end of 2026. So if you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, comment, all of those things. If you send me a note, I will definitely get back with you, because I try to respond to every single person who reaches out to us. And if you happen to be on the internet, go to Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Check out my new book, 10 Topics to Help Managers, Leaders, and Entrepreneurs Get Better at What You Do. You can find it on my website, benolmos.com. The first chapter, absolutely free, so you can get a taste of what I write like. And if you like it, you can buy the book and get more of it. So anyways, folks, thank you all for checking this out. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to DissedMedia, A Startup Story. This podcast was produced and edited by Ben Olmos and is a production of DissedMedia Corporation. If you're interested in learning more about anything you heard on this episode, please reach out to us at podcast@dissedmedia.com. You can also get more information about this and other episodes or information about our guests by checking out dailypitch.news, our business and insights publication focused on helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.